I think it's safe to say that if not for the virus, 2020 would have been a pretty typical year. Political division, civil rights movements, tension between nations, disasters, both natural and man-made, these are all fairly standard things for a year. But because there was a novel virus that forced everybody inside and shut everything down, we had no choice but to focus on all the horrible stuff. Going out with friends, traveling the world, or even seeing a movie. So many plans that could have made the year better had to be thrown out the window. But that's all old news, and since it's been about a year since this virus became a pandemic, I think it'll be a nice breather to go over some predictions I made of last year's box office and see how wrong I got them. Now you may have seen something in the description of my videos or in my About tab about a site called Vocal.media. It's basically a blog site where you can write articles and stories about whatever topic you like. And for the past couple years, I've made some predictions about how the biggest movies will perform at the box office. Without further ado, let's go over my 2020 box office predictions. Before we do get started though, a lot of these have been pushed back to this year, so maybe I'll get them right. First on the list is Bad Boys for Life. Predicted an opening weekend of 40 to 43 million with a domestic total of 100 to 115 million and a worldwide total of 290 to 310 million. It actually opened at 62 million with a domestic total of 206.3 million and a worldwide total of 426.5 million. Honestly, this one really threw me for a loop. I wasn't quite sure how to gauge it because it was from directors I had never heard of. It was a continuation of a franchise that hasn't had a new entry in 18 years. Plus, it was released in January, which is mostly known as the dump month. I thought the trailers looked good and I thought it was a sizable hit, but it actually became the highest grossing movie of 2020 for a while. Next, we got Dolittle. Opening weekend of 20 to 23 million, domestic total of 70 to 75 million, and a worldwide total of 200 to 215 million. Actually opened at 21 million with a domestic total of 77 million and a worldwide total of 245 million. This is why I wrote in windows for each thing. I knew that if I predicted the exact amount, I would definitely get it wrong. Looking back on it, I think this was probably the most accurate prediction I made. Sure, the actual worldwide total ended up out being my highest prediction by about 30 million, but hey, close enough. Next up is The Gentleman. I predicted that it would open at 10 to 15 million with a domestic total of 60 to 70 million and end up making a worldwide gross of 100 to 110 million. It ended up opening at 10.6 million with a domestic total of 36.4 million and a worldwide gross of 115 million. Okay, I take that back. This was probably the most accurate prediction I made. I was almost running the money with the opening prediction. I was less than 10 million off with the domestic, and I was only 5 million off with the worldwide. This is technically a 2019 movie because it released December 19th in the United Arab Emirates. But it didn't have a wide release until 2020, so I'm counting it as a 2020 movie. Next up, Birds of Prey, or The Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. Predicted a opening weekend of 40 to 43 million with a domestic total of 110 to 145 million and a worldwide total of 300 to 350 million. In reality, it opened at 33 million, it had a domestic total of 84.1 million, and a worldwide total of 201.8 million. It's a bit hard to give this one the benefit of the doubt because by the time COVID was declared a pandemic, this had been in theaters for about a month and a half, so it was just about under halfway through its theatrical run. That being said, by the time the movie has been in theaters for about a couple months, it's easy to see which way it's going to go. Would it have broken 100 million domestically if there was no pandemic? Maybe. I don't think the R rating hindered its performance, since Joker hit $1 billion around the time Birds of Prey came out, and while Harley Quinn is fairly well known, most people don't quite know her as a leading role. Plus, nobody outside hardcore comic book fans know who the Birds of Prey are. Granted, nobody knew who Guardians of the Galaxy were, but again, Guardians of the Galaxy came out at a time when Marvel had kind of established itself, while DCEU is still very much in the process of finding its footing. The reason I gave it this range was because I figured, okay, Shazam, I said it was going to make 900 million after Aquaman. That didn't pan out. But I also thought, alright, it's low budget, so the roof for success isn't quite as big. So I went and gave them what I thought were pretty modest predictions. Although in hindsight, I don't think anybody would have looked twice if I said that this was going to be a box office bomb. Next up is Sonic the Hedgehog. Opening weekend of 35 to 40 million with a domestic total of 100 to 125 million and a worldwide total of 320 to 350 million. Actual takes, it opened at 58 million with a domestic total of 148.9 million and a worldwide total of 319.7 million. I knew this wasn't going to be a mega hit, but the trailer convinced me that enough people would support this movie. But what I wasn't expecting was how many people here in North America were going to go out and support it. Maybe as an apology for saying, sorry, we downvoted the trailer so much and said about how awful it looked. But yes, Sonic the Hedgehog ended up being one of the pleasant surprises of the year. Sonic felt very much in character, Jim Carrey was really good as Eggman, and while the humor isn't exactly fantastic, it has some clever jokes here and there. Moving on to The Invisible Man. I predicted an opening weekend in the range of 20 to 23 million, with a domestic total of 150 to 170 million, and a worldwide total of 300 to 340 million. I don't know what it was with me giving every February release on this list a total of at least 300 million. But reality shows it opened at 28 million, with a domestic total of 70.4 million, and a worldwide total of 143.1 million. Now, considering its $7 million budget, those numbers are nothing to sneeze at. However, the month was winding down and COVID was spreading to more and more countries, and because of that, more markets were closed. But I just had a feeling that this was going to be like a huge horror hit. And in a sense, it still was. Next, we got Pixar's Onward, with an opening weekend of 50 to 55 million, a domestic total ranging from 200 to 235 million, and a worldwide total of 600 to 650 million. And the actual take? An opening of 39.1 million, a domestic total of 61.5 million, and a worldwide gross of 104.9 million. Yeah, I got this way off the mark. My rationale for this was, it's a Pixar movie, it has Tom Holland and Chris Pratt voicing the lead characters, it's going to be a hit. But I think it was this point when COVID hit North America, and so that's when they really had to start shutting things down. It did give Disney Plus the subscriber boost it needed, so not a total loss. Moving on, we have Bloodshed, the first movie to be released after the pandemic was declared. Predicted an opening weekend of 25 to 30 million, with a domestic total of 75 to 90 million, and a worldwide total of 295 to 310 million. In actuality, an opening weekend of 9.1 million, domestic total of 12.5 million, and a worldwide take of 33.5 million on a budget of 45 million. Again, this was released almost the very weekend that everything shut down. So yeah, this one took a big fat L. Now, why did I think it would do these numbers? Well, if Triple X Return of Xander Cage has proven anything, it's that Vin Diesel can make a global hit out of just about any movie as long as he's doing stunts and has a lot of explosions. Plus, it is a superhero movie that's not from Marvel or DC, so I figured that maybe it would be a hit with the niche crowd, but as I mentioned in the article, it could become another case of Hellboy Call of Darkness, otherwise known as Hellboy 2019. Moving on to the next on the list is A Quiet Place Part 2, which is coming up this Memorial Day. Opening weekend of 40 to 48 million, a domestic total of 170 to 185 million, and a worldwide total of 285 to 310 million. I think this is a pretty safe bet in terms of success, but I went a bit lower than the original because most sequels tend to perform less than the original. Next, we have Mulan. Opening weekend of 100 to 130 million, with a domestic total of 470 to 500 million, and a worldwide total of 1.1 to 1.3 billion dollars. And the actual numbers are no opening weekend and no domestic total since the movie went straight to Disney Plus. But it did make money overseas for a grand worldwide total of $66.8 million. And if I remember correctly, this movie cost about 100 to 120 million. And now I know what you're thinking. Why would I give a movie that's been dragged through the mud across the internet such a high box office total? Well, it's for three simple reasons. Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King. All their remakes made $1 billion. So what reason did I have to believe that this wouldn't make $1 billion? And based on the trailer, it actually looked fairly different than the original animated movie. I thought, okay, maybe they're going more in line with the original war poem. But obviously that wasn't the case, and based on what I've heard, I am glad it wasn't the case. I'm hoping that this is the nail in the coffin of remaking Disney Renaissance movies, but I doubt it. Moving on, we have The New Mutants. Opening weekend of 30 to 34 million, a domestic total of 95 to 105 million, for a worldwide total of 220 to 250 million. And the actual numbers are an opening weekend of $7 million, a domestic total of 23.8 million, and a worldwide total of 48 million. Oh, that is worse. That is a worse number than Dark Phoenix. Now, this was a movie I was personally rooting for. It had been pushed back several times. There was rumors that Fox was forcing the director to make changes to it in the editing booth. But once it got a final release date and the director confirmed that what was going to be put on screen was his original vision, I relaxed. And while I didn't hate the New Mutants, it sucked enough that people said, nah, we're not giving you our money. A bit of a shame, since it was sort of going the way of Deadpool and Logan, in which it tried to deviate and stand out among the X-Men franchise. Alas, Fox's X-Men is dead, and New Mutants was unfortunately the rotting corpse that it left behind. No Time to Die. Opening weekend of 74 to 77 million, a domestic total of 185 to 230 million, and a worldwide total of around 775 to 800 million. The Daniel Craig James Bond movies have been nothing if successful. Craig's tenure as Bond has broke several records for the franchise, including the first billion-dollar movie, which will most likely remain its only billion-dollar movie until a much better James Bond comes along. However, it's always been a pattern of great, meh, great, meh. I'm hoping that pattern continues and this is great, but James Bond actors often have a habit of making their last James Bond movie their worst. And based on what I've heard about this movie, which you've probably heard a dozen times over, I am not confident that this will break Skyfall's record. The way I see it, people will go to this movie because it's Daniel Craig's last James Bond movie, and if it sucks, they'll say, well, don't have to see any more. And if it's awesome, then they'll say, oh boy, can't wait for the next one. Regardless, I think this movie will be the deciding factor in the future of the James Bond franchise. Black Widow. My prediction for the opening weekend is 90 to 105 million, a domestic total of 320 to 355 million, and a worldwide total of 985 million to 1.1 billion. This, I'm sort of waddling on whether or not this could still happen. Right now, it's still locked in its first weekend of May date, which Marvel has pretty much owned for the past decade. It also depends on how much of the population is vaccinated by that time. I think it will do well because it's one of the core Avengers members getting her own movie, and of course people are going to turn out for that. But again, it all depends on where we're at when the first weekend of May rolls around. Side note, it got pushed to July 9th and will be on Disney Plus with premiere access. Fast and Furious 9, or F9, The Fast Saga. Predicting an opening weekend of 80 to 90 million with a domestic total of 100 to 200 million and a worldwide total of 850 to 900 million. I was initially thinking of putting this one in the billion-dollar club, but Hobbs & Shaw was a nosedive compared to Fast and Furious 8. So I'm thinking maybe people are just about done with this franchise now. However, since this is meant to be the second to last movie, maybe they'll take this dwindling box office as a sign of, okay, we gotta wrap this up. Next we have SpongeBob Sponge on the Run. Opening weekend of 40 to 43 million, with a domestic total of 75 to 80 million, and a worldwide total of 170 to 200 million. And the numbers on the board are an opening weekend of 865,000 and a domestic total of 4.8 million, and since there was no international release, that's also the worldwide total. I think it was only in theaters for about a week or a month or so, and then Paramount said, you know what, we're just going to put it on video on demand. Definitely the smarter way to go. I thought this movie would do reasonably well in numbers because the last two movies have been fairly successful. However, I think the writing on the wall was clear that it was just mainly going to serve as a boost for various spin-offs. So maybe that's another reason it tanked. Next up is Artemis Fowl. Opening weekend of 20 to 25 million, domestic total of 65 to 80 million, and a worldwide total of 120 to 130 million. And the actual numbers are, did not get a theatrical release and went straight to Disney Plus instead. I knew this was going to be a box office bomb, but it's a fantasy movie that's intended to be for all ages, so Disney probably said, yep, put it out there. If it's a bomb, so what? We'll just write it off. Moving on to Wonder Woman 1984. This was a movie I'm looking forward to, and I hope I get to see it in theaters, even though I've heard middling reviews about it. My predictions were 110 to 120 million opening weekend, 425 to 135 million domestic, and the grand worldwide total being 990 million to about 1.2 billion. Rolling in the actual numbers, the domestic opening was 16.7 million with a domestic of 44.9 million and a worldwide total of 164 million. Again, we were very much in the thick of this pandemic when it happened. The reason why I gave it such a high number was because it's a sequel to a superhero movie that a lot of people like. For many people, it's the only good DCEU movie, so of course they're going to turn out again for this one. And it's been a couple years since Aquaman, so I figured it was due for another billion-dollar hit. But I think in an alternate universe where COVID didn't exist, I would still be wrong, just because so many people consider it such a downgrade from the original. Moving on, we have Soul. Saw this during the week between Christmas and New Year, and it is one of my favorite movies of 2020. Opening weekend of 60 to 65 million, a domestic total of 192 to 230 million, and a worldwide total of 800 to 850 million. And looking at the numbers, we have no domestic total or opening weekend, but an international total of 132.9 million. Much like Wonder Woman, this was a movie that came out in the thick of the pandemic. But again, because this is a Pixar movie and it's directed by the same guy who did Up, Monsters, Inc., and Inside Out, I have no doubt in my mind that this would have been a smash hit over the summer. Pete Docter makes some of the best stuff outside of the Toy Story franchise for Pixar. If he leaves, expect the company to just decline. Next up is Top Gun Maverick. Predicted an opening weekend of 50 to 70 million, a domestic total of 220 to 240 million, and a worldwide sum of 670 to 700 million. Thanks to the Mission Impossible movies, Tom Cruise's popularity has gone up in the past decade. I mean, The Mummy, which was a pretty garbage movie, made almost $500 million. That says something about his star power. Speaking of Mission Impossible, the director for the last two movies is directing this one. So yeah, it's going to be fantastic. Because this is coming out in July of this year, I'm pretty confident I'll get this one right. In the Heights, opening weekend of 26 to 30 million, domestic total of 140 to 175 million, and worldwide total of 260 to 290 million. This is based off a musical that was created by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who played the main character in the Broadway production. The trailer emphasized that this was from the creator of Hamilton, and since Hamilton is such a phenomenon, people are going to go, oh, let's go check it out. Not only that, but if La La Land has taught me anything, it's to never underestimate the power of musical geeks. Next up is Ghostbusters Aftermath, which is coming out in November of this year. Estimating a 50 to 55 million opening weekend, a domestic total of 200 to 235 million, and rounded up a worldwide total of 400 to 410 million. I definitely think this is going to be a success because it is a direct sequel to the first two movies, plus I feel like a lot of movies will see this movie multiple times because they want it to succeed as a sort of middle finger to the 2016 reboot. I think it has the potential to become the highest grossing film of the franchise when not adjusted for inflation, but I think what will kind of hinder that number is the fact that it's releasing in November. A movie like Ghostbusters, where it's about adventure, going outside, exploring, and the supernatural, fits better in either July or October. Although maybe I'm just saying that because the kid from Stranger Things is in it, and the last season of Stranger Things came out in July, whereas the previous two came out in October. But having followed the box office for the past couple years, it's that success can come from any month, from any movie. Next up is Tenet. I predicted an opening weekend of 55 to 60 million, a domestic total of 190 to 220 million, and a worldwide total of 690 million to 750 million. And the actual numbers are an opening weekend of 20.2 million, a domestic total of 57.9 million, and a worldwide gross of 363 million. Pretty impressive considering it came out under the same circumstances and around the same time as New Mutants. And at this point, things had calmed down enough where stuff was reopening, and that included movie theaters. And Tenet definitely benefited from that. I am confident that this movie would have done better if this was normal circumstances, but the fact that it was relatively successful despite a pandemic is really saying something. Continuing on, we have Jungle Cruise. Predicted an opening weekend of 50 to 55 million, domestic total of 242 to 265 million, and we're going to sum it up with 690 million to 720 million. This is another prediction that could become true since it was pushed back. I saw in the article that because it's Dwayne Johnson in the jungle, it will remind people a lot of Jumanji, and so they'll check it out. Plus, the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise has been spinning its wheels for the past couple years, so they figured, we have more than one theme park ride, let's try adapting some of those. I think it will be alright, but honestly, the only adaptation of a theme park ride I was interested in was Guillermo del Toro's Haunted Mansion, and that got cancelled years ago. 2 more movies, and then we're out of the summer blockbuster season. Next up is the next entry in the Sony Marvel Universe, Morbius. Predicted an opening weekend of 30 to 35 million, a domestic total of 120 to 160 million, and a worldwide total of 500 to 520 million. This was a movie that got pushed back to about March of this year, but then they decided to kick it all the way to January 2022. Knowing that Sony also was behind Bad Boys for Life, this could mean that this is A, going to be a surprise hit, or B, it's crap and they just want to wash their hands of it as quickly as possible. Although it also depends on how much they try to tie in Venom and Spider-Man and all that. I think a lot of people will get a kick out of seeing Jared Leto act like an emo vampire for a couple hours, And Venom was a huge hit that nobody saw coming. So if I was to start making my prediction for 2022, I would put $100 million less than what I initially predicted. Final movie of the summer season is Bill and Ted Face the Music. Opening weekend of 30 to 35 million, a domestic total of 115 to 145 million, and a worldwide total of 300 to 325 million. Actual numbers were an opening of 1.1 million, a domestic total of 3.4 million, and a worldwide gross of 6.2 million. This was one where I was really depending on Keanu Reeves' star power to carry the box office. But again, pandemic, straight to video, dwindling summer season, all that. The reason I went for this number was because of the John Wick movies. Not only do people want to see Keanu Reeves do stuff other than murder a bunch of violent gangsters, but there's also the nostalgia factor of the original Bill and Ted movies. We're winding down the year now, and first up in the fall movie season is The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. I don't know why they didn't just stick with The Conjuring 3, but predicted an opening weekend of 39.42 million, domestic total of 100 to 120 million, and a worldwide gross of 300 to 330 million. These numbers are all in line with what the first two had, and even though James Wan isn't directing this one, I imagine they'll maintain the same level of quality as the first two. We'll have to wait and see, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed for this one. And by the time this movie comes out this June, it would have been 5 years since we last saw Ed and Lorraine Warren. Yeah, 5 years. Wow, where does the time go? Moving on, we have The King's Man, spin-off of The Kingsman. Opening weekend of 38 to 41 million, a domestic total of 105 to 110 million, and a worldwide gross of 405 to 415 million. I thought September was a bit of an odd choice since that's when The Golden Circle came out, and it was also inferior to the first Kingsman movie. But both Kingsman movies did well, and since this is a different story in a different era, that brand recognition carries over to this prequel. Moving on, we have The Many Saints of Newark. Opening weekend of 10 to 13 million, a domestic total of 40 to 45 million, and a worldwide total of 50 to 55 million. The reason I went with these lower numbers was because it's a prequel to The Sopranos, which is mostly an American thing. I think there'll be a lot of nostalgia for it, and a lot of people who like The Sopranos will go check this out, but I'm not expecting a worldwide hit here. Venom Let There Be Carnage. I predicted an opening weekend of 80 to 90 million, a domestic total of 200 to 235 million, and a worldwide gross of 860 to 900 million. I think it'll be fairly close to the original, and since they got Andy Serkis to direct and they've narrowed the writing team to one person, I think it'll be a bit more focused, and I think it'll make for a more comprehensible movie than the first one. Next up, Death on the Nile. Expecting an opening weekend of 25 to 30 million, a domestic total of 90 to 110 million, and a worldwide total of 300 to 320 million. Once again, this is a movie I think will perform relatively close to the original since it has the same director, the same writer, and the same lead actor. It also has a fairly star-studded cast, so that will definitely help it out too. And then we have Halloween Kills, predicting an opening weekend of 70 to 75 million, domestic total of 130 to 155 million, and worldwide total of 210 to 240 million. 2018's Halloween was a surprise hit, so I have no reason to believe the sequel won't be just as successful. It's also the midpoint in the trilogy that's closing out the Halloween franchise, so fans of both the original and the last one are going to check it out. The Eternals, predicting an opening weekend of 85 to 90 million, a domestic total of 310 to 325 million, and a worldwide total of 830 to 850 million. This is one I think could meet this prediction, but since it's dealing with the weird and playing around with time in this one, as the movie is set to take place on the span of 7,000 years, it's going to be interesting to see how this one performs. Following up with that, we got Godzilla vs. Kong, predicting an opening weekend of 50 to 55 million, a domestic total of 145 to 175 million, and a worldwide total of 490 to 520 million. I know Godzilla King of the Monsters didn't do so well at the theaters, but it's Godzilla vs. King Kong. Who's not going to turn up for that? I doubt it will hit that number, as it is coming out later this month, and the majority of the population won't be vaccinated until the summer. But a movie like this definitely demands a large screen, a big audience. It's an event movie. 3 more to go. Dune. Opening weekend of 30 to 35 million, a domestic grand of 125 to 160 million, and a global sum of 465 to 480 million. Denis Villeneuve hasn't made any ginormous hits yet. His last movie, Blade Runner 2049, unfortunately underperformed at the box office. But I feel like with Star Wars done and Avatar not coming along until next year, there's going to be a gap in sci-fi during the holiday season. I hope this does really well, since Dune is a fantastic book, even though a lot of people say it's practically unfilmable. Uncharted, opening weekend of 55 to 59 million, a domestic total of 165 to 190 million, and a worldwide gross of 380 to 410 million. This is when I sort of just went off the cuff with this one. I mean, video game movies have been getting better, but Tom Holland as Nathan Drake and Mark Wahlberg as Sully, that doesn't make any sense. Not to mention, this movie has been in development hell for several years. At that time, Naughty Dog closed out the franchise. A revolving door of directors, writers, and actors came and went, but now all of a sudden they want to make it an origin story? It sounds like they're less concerned with making a proper adaptation of the game, and more concerned with cashing in on Tom Holland's recent fame. I mean, heck, when this movie was first developed, Mark Wahlberg was actually in the runnings to play Nathan Drake. Now he's their older mentor. And to add even more salt on the wound, there is an Uncharted short film starring Nathan Fillion as Nathan Drake, and it is as perfect as a video game adaptation as you can get. The fact that Nathan Fillion wasn't even considered for the part of Nathan Drake is just idiocracy on Sony's part. I feel like whatever positive reception Mortal Kombat creates about video game movies, Uncharted will end up undoing. Finally, we have The Tomorrow War, a movie that was scheduled to come out at Christmas, but is now scheduled for July. Opening weekend of 20 to 25 million, a domestic total of 125 to 150 million, and a worldwide total of 315 to 335 million. Chris Pratt is leading the cast, and it looks like it could be a solid sci-fi action movie. At the very least, the concept seems original. The story goes is that in the future, humanity has lost the fight against alien invaders, so the survivors have to travel back in time to recruit soldiers to fight the war in the future. Hence, the Tomorrow War. Like I said in the article, it could fill the void that Star Wars left behind. But since it's coming out in July, we'll just have to make this a summer hit then. And that is it. That is the end of my 2020 box office predictions. Said the word million so much it doesn't even feel like a real word anymore. Anyways, what do you think of those predictions? Do you think I was fairly accurate when I made them back in January of 2020, or was I off the mark right from the start? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below, and that's all there is.